During the 1700s, the American Revolutionary War and the subsequent founding of the United States seemed to have flipped the world upside down. A couple of colonies banding together to take on the world's most powerful military and setting up what one day would become the most powerful country in its own right was something that few of the time foresaw coming to fruition. It was a time in history that saw many rise to the occasion and do something that had never been done before. But while many of these figures are known throughout the world, and especially in America, people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton, there is one significant figure that's often overlooked or even completely forgotten: the financier of the Revolutionary War, Robert Morris Jr. He used his immense wealth and business acumen to transform the outlook of the war, getting the new nation through some of the toughest financial troubles it had ever faced. But it would be his actions after the war that would land him in hot water as part of the first Congressional Inquiry, later being put in prison for his actions, leaving him to die poor and forgotten to history. This is the story of Robert Morris Jr., and this is Learn Something New. Robert Morris Jr. was born in Liverpool, England in 1734, and though little is known about his early life, it was clear that his father, Robert Morris Sr., wanted him to follow in his footsteps as a successful tobacco merchant. After seeing opportunity in the New World, Morris's father brought his son into America in 1738, setting up a shipping company in Oxford, Maryland. While he was successful in this venture, it wouldn't be long before tragedy struck the family. In a wild twist of fate, Morris's father was aboard a merchant ship in the year 1750 as it was coming into port. As a few of the crew climbed into a small boat to go ashore, the captain of the ship readied his cannons to fire a salute, as was customary at the time. However, when a fly landed on the captain's nose, he swat at it, which the crew misinterpreted as an order to fire, shooting the cannons prematurely at Morris's boat just 20 yards away. Morris Sr. was struck by debris, breaking his arm and inflicting a wound that became infected almost immediately. He would die just 6 days later, leaving a fairly large fortune to his son, Robert Morris Jr. The young Morris had only been in school for 1 year before he moved into an apprenticeship as a clerk in Philadelphia, still wanting to follow in his late father's footsteps. Even at this young age, he had a deep understanding of the shipping industry, with knowledge of the complicated monetary system, the risks that pirates posed to ships, as well as the shifting market demands. As he entered adulthood, the business of Willing, Morris & Company became one of the largest and most successful in all of the colonies. Morris had his eyes set far beyond the colonies, however, becoming one of the first colonial insurers of cargo vessels and even opening up a few routes from China as well as countries around the Mediterranean to American trade. But he would have a wrench thrown into his business in 1765 that very well may have shaped history. This was the advent of the Stamp Act of 1765. It was essentially a direct tax on the colonies, and is often credited as one of the main inciting incidents for the Revolutionary War. Robert Morris was on the front lines of protest in Philadelphia, driving a British tax collector from the city and even convincing a tea ship to turn around before it could dock at the port of Philadelphia. But despite this, and the fact that Morris was nominated as a delegate from Pennsylvania to the Second Continental Congress, with fierce opposition to the Stamp Act, he actually didn't initially support independence from Britain. Instead, he was a proponent of more favorable terms with Parliament, fearing how war with the most powerful military would affect his business and status. But when the Continental Congress put it to a vote, Morris knew that he was in the minority, abstaining from the vote and letting everyone else vote in favor of independence. To his credit, however, once the vote passed, he threw the entirety of his reputation and resources into the war effort. After signing the Declaration of Independence on August 2, 1776, Morris said it was the duty of every individual to act his part in whatever station his country may call him to in the hours of difficulty, danger, and distress. But as one of the richest men in the colonies, Morris knew better than anyone that America didn't just need to succeed militarily to win. They needed to succeed financially. And in its infancy, America had deep struggles with funding its war effort. The 1777 Articles of Confederation, the United States' first constitution, allowed Congress to request funds from the states, but didn't require the states to comply. And, notably different from the modern Constitution, the Articles of Confederation didn't allow the federal government to tax its citizens. Because of this, troops went for months without pay while Congress begged the states and European allies for loans. While on the brink of economic ruin, Congress appointed Morris as the Superintendent of Finance, the government's very first executive office. Unlike the later office, the Secretary of the Treasury, that would be held by Alexander Hamilton, Morris was given nearly unchecked powers over America's finances. He leveraged his business contacts in the shipping world and relationships with foreign investors to procure desperately needed supplies and munitions, and to borrow millions of dollars backed by his own promissory notes. Morris also worked closely with another revolutionary financier and Polish immigrant, Chaim Solomon, to fund the Patriot cause for much of the war. When Washington needed gunpowder, Morris smuggled it past British blockades. When the newly minted Continental Navy needed ships, Morris supplied 3 of his own. And when all other American currencies collapsed, Congress paid troops and bought supplies using Morris notes, essentially IOUs guaranteed by Morris's immense wealth. While it would be overblown to say that Morris single-handedly financed the revolution, his credit and reputation allowed Congress to sustain the war effort to a degree that wouldn't have been possible without his support. But even while helping out the war effort domestically, putting his fortune and assets like ships on the line to bolster America against the British, Morris still profited immensely from his international trade overseas. And that's where he began to run into some trouble with Congress. After the Constitution was ratified and Morris was elected senator from Pennsylvania, some of his fellow congressmen openly asked whether Morris had truly funded the American Revolutionary War or whether he had profited from it. In 1785, Congress had passed a resolution calling for an investigation into Morris's financial dealings during the Revolution, but the threat appeared to be hollow, and the investigation was never initiated. When the matter was brought up again in 1790, Morris wrote a letter to George Washington requesting that the investigation actually be carried out this time, if only to clear his name. In the end, Congress settled for a report of Morris's business receipts from the period in question, but none could find any evidence of him misusing his position for profit. After the investigation ended and his term in Congress concluded, Morris left politics behind, devoting his time back into his businesses. Despite everything that had happened during his time in Congress, he still had faith that America would be a strong country where people could make more money than they could ever imagine. Wanting to take part in this, he began to get into nearly every industry, building a factory town along the Delaware River in Pennsylvania, which to this day bears his name. In everything from the silkworm trade to maple sugar, Morris saw his businesses prosper. In fact, he was so optimistic about America's future that he felt they were going to see an incredible surge of immigrants like never before. To prepare for this, he used a significant portion of his wealth as well as millions of dollars of loans to purchase 6 million acres of land, over 7 times the size of Rhode Island, all the while confident that he could flip it for a massive profit. In fact, he was so confident that he started construction on a massive mansion in Pennsylvania, designed by the engineer that designed the layout of Washington, D.C. But the problem was, the large population of immigrants didn't come. They wouldn't be here for another century. Eventually, his creditors came asking for their money, around $3 million, an unheard of amount of money for the late 1700s. To avoid those wishing to collect on the money he owed, Morris ended up locking himself in a countryside house for months. But eventually, he relented and was placed in debtor's prison, where people who couldn't afford to pay back their loans stayed until they could repay what they owed, or finish out the sentence. He served 3 years behind bars, only released after Congress passed the Bankruptcy Act of 1800, allowing him to liquidate his assets, including his Philadelphia mansion that he never actually ended up living in. Robert Morris left prison a changed man, living his last 5 years away from the world of business and politics, scraping just enough to get by. People were disgusted by his actions after the Revolution. When he died on May 8, 1806, the local papers only printed a 5-line obituary. There were no speeches for the former founding father, and no monuments erected in his honor like so many others that he worked closely with. He played an extremely critical role in the founding of the United States, but despite becoming one of the richest men of his time, he has very nearly become forgotten to history. Thank you for watching Learn Something New. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like so that others might enjoy it as well. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.